Hi, everyone. Anne O'Connell with OC Publishing here, and welcome to the author journey. It has been a wonderful summer, and we took a little bit of a break, but I'm so pleased to be back. Just FYI, we will be going weekly now, every single week, Tuesday afternoons at 4 o'clock. And it gives me such great pleasure to start this wonderful journey with you with a Canlit superstar. One of my editors, when she found out who we were going to be talking to today, said, "Oh my goodness, he's a Canlit superstar." So we have with us today Lawrence Hill, who's the author of 11 books of fiction and nonfiction. And most recently, Beatrice and Croc Harry. How beautiful is that cover? I can't wait to delve into that. We'll be talking about Beatrice and Croc Harry predominantly today. His literary awards and recognition are lengthy, way too numerous to mention, but take a look at his website and you'll be very impressed. He's been inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame and is the recipient of 10 honorary doctorates from Canadian universities. And I think he has 4 kids too, so a dad as well. He teaches at University of Guelph, those lucky students, and splits his time between Newfoundland and Ontario. He's just an all-around great guy, and I'm really thrilled. Please help me welcome Lawrence Hill. Hey,
Thank you.
Lawrence.
Hey, and thank you very much. And by the way, just so nobody accuses me of losing count, it's 5 children.
Oh, 5. Oh my goodness. Wow. My apologies.
And it's
5.
okay. I wouldn't want any one of them feeling left out.
No, absolutely not. And it just seems like yesterday that we were chatting, we met at Read by the Sea in River John here in Nova Scotia. And the time has just flown. How was your summer?
Thank you. It was a good summer. Um, I had a little trouble flying from Halifax to Newfoundland after Read by the Sea because of all the
Oh
flight
dear.
cancellations. But it's been a good summer. I've had some good writing in Newfoundland, and I was really happy to spend some time in Nova Scotia. I'd never been to River John before, so that was really great. And so, thank you. It's been a good summer.
What a great time it was there, and they do such a nice job at Read by the Sea, and I think
They do.
we were all thrilled to have you. And that's where I was introduced to Beatrice and Croc Harry. And just look at this gorgeous cover. I think, yeah, we're going to delve into that. And this is your first middle grade novel, right?
Yes, it is my first novel for children.
Right. And it's a bit of a departure from what you've normally written in the past. Talk a little bit about how that sort of came about, like why the switch in genre?
Well, it's definitely a departure, but I would hope that every book I write is a departure from what I wrote before. We
I
don't
love
want
it.
to really write the same book twice. Now, it's
Right.
true that in this case, I'm moving, into writing. I say for children, but I very much hope that adults will enjoy the novel too. I still enjoy children's literature,
Me too.
but it was a departure in terms of the primary audience, or at least a large portion of the audience, definitely being for children. And it wasn't like an intellectual decision. Now it's time to write a book for middle grade readers. It's just a book that wanted to come out of me. It's a book that I was ready to write. It's a book that my soul wanted to toss out into the world. And so it's a book that, as I say playfully in the novel, it's a book that spoke to my goosebump. The goosebump, of course, being a fictitious organ in the human body that represents the human soul.
Well, and I have to say, one of the things that I loved about this book, and of course, in my previous life, I was a preschool teacher, hence my love of children's literature as well, and why it's become quite a niche that I publish. And so I love reading children's books. The play with language, you mentioned Guzalam, and and the real and concocted fun words. I was good. Let's talk a little bit about that because there's a whole dictionary at the back as well, right? And you have to, when we talk about which ones are real and which ones are concocted. Um, how did that sort of come about?
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed them. I'm so glad you love the language play. I love language. I
I
mean,
do.
how can you be a writer and not love language? And sometimes
Right.
the sillier, the more over the top, the more ridiculous and pretentious, the better, because you can make fun with
Right.
it, you can play with it, you can laugh at it. And I
Like
like to
Dr.
roll
Seuss, right?
like Dr. Seuss. And
Yeah.
my mother read a lot of nonsense poetry to us when we were children, and my father told wild, crazy bedtime stories, and he would make up words, when he was telling us bedtime stories. And I learned
Oh,
the
I
word
love it.
Guzlam. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep. I'm just saying hi, Lana. Lana Shoup has just joined us.
I learned the word Guzlam from my father. I've never heard anybody else use it, although I reprise it in this book. And so the book has plenty of weighty, serious themes, and we can talk about some of those. But I
Yes.
wanted it to be light and funny and moving quickly and moving deftly across the page, entertaining for any reader. And so, one of the ways that I sought to entertain, to engage, and to to kind of tickle the fancy of my reader was to play with language with the same love that I feel for it. And so, a lot of ridiculous, over the top words. Beatrice's antagonist is a 700-pound crocodile with a huge vocabulary, and so she's got to try to keep up with this fast talking crocodile named Harry.
Oh my God, he was amazing. And of course, as I delved into it, I couldn't help but thinking this is sort of Alice in Wonderland slash Wizard of Oz with a real twist, right? And the main character being a little black girl who is absolutely um, enthusiastic and curious, and but she finds herself in quite a predicament, doesn't she? And Croc Harry kind of reminded me a little bit of the Cheshire Cat, only a little less furry and cuddly.
Yes, crocodiles aren't all that cuddly, although Beatrice does find a way in the end to cuddle a little bit with him when she
Yeah,
feels it's safe to do so.
yeah.
But Beatrice is a young girl of uncertain age who wakes up alone in a massive forest. And she's been kicked out of the human race. She has no idea who her people are. Her memory has been erased. She doesn't even know her last name, if she has a mother. She doesn't even initially recognize or know that she's black, as she's
Hmm.
alone in the forest and has other things to think about off the top. Like, is that crocodile going to kill me and have me for breakfast? And so she has other things to think about. And so it's a story about a girl who's trying to figure out who she is, where her home might be, if she could possibly make her way back to it, and why she's been basically kicked out of the human race.
Hmm. And what one of the things I really like about it is as you progress in the story, there are a few little hints here and there, but there's lots of twists that I, you know, couldn't have seen coming. But it's not really until, and we don't want any spoilers, it's not really until closer to the very end before you start to understand, why she isn't in the human race anymore. And there's a lot of layers here. And you mentioned a little bit about some of the tough themes. And as I was reading, of course, I read a book like from acknowledgments or dedication copyright page right through to the very very last page, and so I read that dictionary and kept going back and forth. And one of the things that I found really fascinating was the word black was in the dictionary, and there was quite a two different sort of dichotomous definitions. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, let's remember that racial identity is an artificial construct that human beings have conceived and dreamed up, often usually for nefarious and negative hierarchical purposes. It's
Hmm.
just an invented thing.
Hmm.
We're not biologically distinct, and there are as many variations between the so-called races as there are among, say, the so-called races as there are between them.
Hmm.
And so Beatrice, you know, I've spent my life writing about and coming back over and over again, hopefully in different ways in different books, to issues of identity and blackness and what it means to be black and what it means to be black in Canada, in the world, how one's identity is constituted. What is identity and how can it be lost? How can it be regained? Where's home? What if we're taken away from home? How do we find our way back?
Mhm.
Will it ever change? Will home ever be the same? These are issues that seem to I keep coming back to, my own lifelong obsessions, I guess. And so Beatrice, because she awakens with amnesia, she doesn't know that she's black, and so the reader gets to watch it dawn upon her. The reader gets to watch her discover her own racial identity, partly through playing with her beautiful mane of hair. And she has
Mhm.
no hair products in this forest, and so she's got to find natural ways to deal with this big, beautiful head of black hair. Um, and it begins to dawn on her who she is, and for reasons good and bad. Like she has to confront racism,
Mhm.
as she begins to have the possibility of reconnecting with human beings near the end of the story. And
Mhm.
she's on a journey. And so initially, when somebody calls her black, she thinks it's kind of rude and an insult, because she doesn't think of herself as black yet. She's just thinking of herself as a girl in the forest. But as it begins to dawn on her that blackness is much more than just a derogatory insult, it's also a way of seeing oneself. It's a way of being part of a diaspora. It's a way of celebrating oneself, one's family, one's history, one's origins, one's ancestors. She begins to understand kind of the nuanced concepts of blackness. And on one
Mhm.
hand, somebody might call her black in an insulting way that upsets her. But on the other hand, she might begin to grow into a way of feeling and respecting and loving,
Mhm.
her own black identity. And so she has to juggle with the complexity of this. Is she being insulted, or is she able to celebrate herself and her background?
I I love that insight. And earlier in the story, there's also I found sort of a discussion of a bit of elitism as well with the Rabbit Academy, right? So you've got a certain echelon of rabbits that were allowed in, and a certain echelon that were kind of locked out. Um, so she's
Yes,
introduced to kind of that theme before the whole, discussion about, her blackness, so to
yes.
speak.
Well, Beatrice has to form some friendships in this forest since there are no other human beings, and she discovers that she has this magical, ethereal, unexpected ability to communicate verbally with crocodiles and rabbits and tarantulas and all manner of
I
creatures.
love it. I love the
Um,
tarantula.
one, Fuzzy, one of her
Mhm,
favorite little people, I say people between quotes, is this
mhm.
rabbit pretentiously named Horace Harrison Jr. the Third. And Horace Harrison Jr. the Third is a speckled rabbit. That is to say that his fur is speckled. It's got
Mhm,
dots all over it. And he discovers that there's a bit of a hate on, there's some segregation going on in the forest, and speckled rabbits are not allowed to attend school. They're not allowed to go to the rabbit training academy.
mhm,
They're not allowed to be part of the rabbit world if their fur isn't perfectly smooth and of a monochrome kind of fur color.
mhm,
And so Beatrice is introduced, as is Horace, to the concept of racial segregation. And of course, the word segregation, I don't think is used in the book itself. In the dictionary it is, but not in the book itself,
mhm,
I don't think. But I'm introducing children to the concept of segregating, or differentiating in a negative way people
mhm,
according to people, animals, according
mhm.
to arbitrary things like how they look.
And stereotyping, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to give a shout out to the folks who have joined us. Lana Shoup is here, and Linda Schmidt as well, and Angela Rose Sampson. Lots of great comments. Lana says we need to give them stories to encourage conversations. Beatrice and Croc Harry is an excellent example of this kind of story. And children are so much more open to talk about tough stuff than we adults tend to shy away from. And that's really true, and sometimes, that out of the mouths of babes is, a very true statement. And oftentimes they can give us, better understanding of things if we just let them discuss some of those tougher topics, right?
Absolutely. Well, children live through many of the same horrors that adults face. Children today, millions of
Hmm.
them around the world, they face war and famine and
Yeah.
racial discrimination, oppression. Some of them
Hmm.
unfortunately die trying to flee oppression, trying to make their way across, say, the Mediterranean in rickety boats to safety in Europe, or so they think.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
children deal with the same monumentally challenging, sometimes life-threatening issues that their parents do. And my feeling is that if children can live these things, which they do by the
Mhm.
millions every day of the year, they certainly, when they're ready, can read about them too. And of course,
Mhm.
no child is obliged to read the book. People come to books for the most part voluntarily. I guess schools might assign books, but for the most part, you read a book because you want to. So nobody has to
Exactly.
read it, and people come to it when they're ready. Maybe it might be a 7-year-old, or maybe that child has to wait till they're 14, but or whatever, or maybe they're not going to read it till they're 44. But
Mhm.
people come to books, I think, when they're ready, and I don't believe in talking down to children, and I feel that children are a lot smarter and more worldly and have a greater moral compass, a greater kind of implicit understanding of how the world works,
Mhm.
I should say, an innate understanding of how the world works than many of us give them credit for. So I don't want to talk down to children who read this book. On the contrary, I want to challenge them and excite them and talk up.
Mhm. Yeah, and adding the dictionary at the back is was a great idea. Linda
Right.
always say is also saying Beatrice being kicked out of the human race brings Kita from the illegal to my mind. The themes of belonging and identity seem to be close to your heart. And she asks, does writing about these issues bring a sense of understanding or awareness for you?
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you for referring to the legal Takeda, who is also a beloved character of mine. Keda is an elite marathon runner who has to flee genocide in his own country and goes to be an undocumented refugee in a rich country where he's not wanted. So it's a
Mhm.
story about an undocumented refugee who's an elite marathoner trying to hide from authorities and escape persecution. Um, Yes, writing, it's a balm. It's a way of making sense of the world. It's a way of addressing injustice and trying to make it feel better. I don't mean by putting a sugar coating over it, but
Yeah.
just writing about things, expressing your pain, putting your characters through the paces that other people have gone through. It's a way of kind of feeling the world more deeply and processing it. And I'm not saying accepting it passively, but just ingesting it and passing comment on it, registering it and saying something, and just speaking and having your voice heard, and ingesting and digesting the way the world works is, you know, through fiction is the way that I sort of feel better about life. It's my way of processing life and my understanding of it. And so, yes, absolutely, writing about characters such as Beatrice or Keita in the illegal helps me feel better. Not because I'm trying to write fairy tale endings or make everything nicey nice, but just writing about life in a way that seems as real as possible to me, even in a fantasy like this book. It feels real to me, makes me feel better about life.
Absolutely. And did you prepare to do a reading for us today from Beatrice and Croc Harry?
Um, I could do a little reading if you'd like. How long would you
That'd be great.
like me to read for?
Oh, just 2 or 3 minutes.
Sure, I'll just get my book. It's right on the shelf. I'll pull it off and I'll
Oh,
be back to you
excellent.
in 10
You're
seconds or
welcome. And I'll
5
just
seconds.
show this. Look at this beautiful cover. And if I mentioned, I think I mentioned in the introduction that Beatrice and Croc Harry was published by HarperCollins Canada. And there we are. I mean,
Thank
I
you.
picked out a bunch of my favorite excerpts, but I'd rather you pick
Oh,
out yours.
well, I'd love to hear what one of your favorite bits is
Okay.
actually.
All right.
Um, but
You go first.
I thought I'd just read the first paragraph of the story, just to give you a sense of her inner voice, because I think one of the things that a novelist, the best gift that a novelist can give to a reader, is giving the reader a sense of the inner private voice of the character. And it's a gift that other people can't do. Like a painter can't do that. A filmmaker, for the most part, except for some occasional voiceovers, can't do that. But a novelist can get you into the inner voice of a character, and that's one of our greatest gifts to the reader. So here I'm trying to get into the inner, private, personal voice of Beatrice, who's awakening alone and abandoned in a massive forest with no other human beings around and no memory. Beatrice was not entirely sure if she was dead. She raised two fingers to her lips and felt her own warm breath. She appeared to be awakening from a deep, dark dream in which she'd either died or come close to it. As she opened her eyes and studied her circumstances, the facts confirmed that she was alive. She didn't know much, but she knew this: her name was indeed Beatrice. It had a certain flow, 3 syllables, and never just two. Thank you very much. So that's the opening paragraph from Beatrice and Croc Harry. And I'd love to hear if you're willing to share, and if there's a piece of the book or an element of it that really pleased you and you want to chat about, you're more than welcome to mention it, and I could discuss it with you if you'd like.
Well, I started folding down pages and then it got a little ridiculous.
Too much.
But one of the pages I folded down was actually when they're getting ready to leave. And she's trying to clean up the tree house. And again, I don't want to spoil anything here. But they're talking about change and how they're going to get there. And there's a statement that he says, "I am strangely dissatisfied. I do not belong here, and I want to find out why. But I do fear that I've done something terribly wrong." And I paused when I read that because, it's reminiscent of, any point in time in our lives when you feel unsettled, but you can't really put your finger on it, right?
Yes. Think of all the times you've gone away from a meeting and you have this vibe that something went south, something went wrong. What did I say? What did I do? How did
Yeah.
I somehow manage to hurt that person's feelings without even intending to? Have I done something wrong? It could be worse than that too, of course, but
Hmm.
I think we often have these doubts about ourselves and these fears that we've done something wrong. But in this case, the character Croc Harry, 700 pounds, 69 tooth, highly carnivorous crocodile, fast talking crocodile, he also, by the way, comes into this forest without awareness of who he really is or what his background is either. And
Hmm.
Harry's going to discover his background along the way while Beatrice discovers hers. They're going to go on a road trip and they're going to try to figure out, who
Road
they are.
trip.
A road trip and try to figure out who she is, and he's going to try to figure out who he is, and it's painful. And
Hmm.
so I like the idea that he's walking around with this sense that there's something terrible in his past, but he doesn't even know what it is. And he's burdened by that. And he feels a guilt, even though he doesn't know exactly why. And he's
Hmm.
troubled, he feels badly. And so he's trying to birth this guilt and find out what is in his past and why he's feeling so bad, even though it terrifies him. Because he
Hmm.
feels that once it comes out, Beatrice is going to excommunicate him or maybe refuse to be his friend. And I think I was influenced in imagining this character, Croc Harry, by spending time in federal prisons and in book clubs and teaching in federal penitentiaries. You get to know a person and you get a sense of their personality without even knowing their last name or what they're in for.
Hmm.
You don't
Hmm.
ask a person if you're in a book club, speaking to a book club in the prison, you don't ask somebody, hey, what are you in for? That would be rude. That would be rude.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
really not my business. I'm not their judge. I'm a writer. I'm a
Right.
creative writing teacher. I don't
Yeah.
come in there to judge a prisoner. They've already been judged by a judge and sent to jail. So it's not
Hmm.
really my business to ask somebody if I'm, say, leading a conversation about a book in a prison.
Hmm.
What are you in for? You know, it would just be invasive and
Hmm.
unnecessary. And that's not my role. And so
Hmm.
I've come to know people who are incarcerated, some of whom obviously did some terrible things, at least are convicted of having done terrible things, without having to so much worry about their past, but to focus on this person sitting before me. What are they
Hmm.
saying? What are they sharing? What are they feeling? How can we reach each other? And if we can't do that, there's really no hope for the human race. And so Harry too has a terrible secret in his past. He doesn't even know what the secret is initially.
Hmm. Hmm.
And but we get to discover something about, if I can use the word humanity, even though he's a crocodile, we get to learn something about his humanity before we discover his terrible past. And I think that's an interesting way to bring a reader onto the sorry, to bring a character onto the page. You get to kind of enjoy them a little bit and maybe hopefully maybe fall in love with them or find a reason to admire them or to like them before you
100%.
discover everything that might be bad about them.
Well, and the other thing about, with Croc Harry, I loved him as a character as well, is he's fighting some of his natural, you know, propensities. He doesn't eat Beatrice, right? It's like, is and he really takes a step back and, okay, what do I really need to eat, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's quite an interesting character trait to explore as well.
Well, not only does he suppress his carnivorous instinct so he doesn't kill Beatrice,
That's what
but
I was gonna
more,
say, right.
yeah, but more than that, he, in a platonic way, like he falls in love with Beatrice. He loves Beatrice. He
Mhm,
craves her friendship. He
mhm,
needs and wants her friendship more than anything else in his whole world, this forest.
mhm,
Croc Harry wants to be Beatrice's friend.
mhm.
And I'm very attracted to the idea of unlikely or unexpected connections between people, if I can say that,
Yes,
between
yes,
beings. And what
yes.
better than to have an unexpected but rich friendship between a little girl and a big crocodile? Like it seems like it's such an unexpected and impossible thing that makes it that much more appealing to me to write about.
Yeah, oh, there is so much to unpack in a short period of time, but I also wanna make sure we don't miss anybody's comments. Angela Rose Sampson says, "We love this book. We read it with the Young Readers Book Club with the Picto Library, and it was such a great story. We loved the dictionary too." So, lots of votes for the dictionary. And I know you kind of went back and forth, with your editor possibly about how much or how little to include of the dictionary,
Yes.
right?
Well, I had a fantastic editor. Her name
Mhm.
is Suzanne Sutherland. She left HarperCollins after the book was finished, but she was just great. When I finished the first draft, I had a longish dictionary at the back, maybe twice or three times the length of the current one. And she just said, "No dictionary. Love the book. We'll buy it. We'll publish it. No dictionary. You can't have a dictionary." And I said, "What?" And she said, "No, it's not done. You don't put dictionaries at the back of books, especially books for children."
We put
And
glossaries.
initially, I just kind of tucked my tail between my legs and accepted that, and just said, "Oh darn, I really love that dictionary. I'm sorry I have to lose it." But then, as I started writing draft number two, I began to realize how much I loved that dictionary and that I should really stand up and fight for it. So I got back to her a few months later and I said, "Suzanne, I'm willing to make this dictionary better, to sharpen it, to make it into a little character in the book, to cut out some pages if it's too long. But I really want this dictionary because I feel it's a defining and central part of the whole story." And she, to her credit, she was mature and visionary enough to say, "You know what? Okay, Larry, we'll use it, but it can't be this long. You can't have a 60-page dictionary at the back of the book." So I tried to improve it and to spruce it up and to make it even more
Mhm.
lively and kind of the dictionary has a personality. The definitions are not just standard dictionary definitions; they're
No.
playful, sometimes ridiculous definitions.
Yeah.
The definitions of words themselves are sometimes silly. They're meant to be entertaining, at least some of
Yep.
them. Some of them are serious, others are playful. And
And so,
so,
like, refer back and forth as well. So,
mhm.
it's when you're reading like I said, the dictionary part was just as entertaining almost, like you
I
said.
hope so. I
Oh,
certainly
yeah.
loved writing it. But the other thing
Mm.
is that even for words that are entirely invented, like say decrocustation, which by the way is if you're a small person and you're swallowed whole by a crocodile, you have a short window of time to hurl yourself back out of the belly of the crocodile. And the process of kind of pole vaulting yourself out of the belly of a crocodile is called decrocustation. So um, but even a word that's entirely silly and totally invented like that, it's sort
Mhm.
of defined on the page. So,
Mhm.
yes, you can look for the dictionary definition at the back of the book, but if you're reading along, you'll
Mhm.
most of the words you'll understand
Yes.
by the context. So the context does explain the meaning of
Oh,
almost all of the bigger
absolutely.
words.
And some of the real words are also fun to say out loud, like nictitating membrane. Like,
Yes,
how fun is that?
it is.
Nictitating.
I only learned that word when I was researching this book, but a crocodiles actually do cry. They do actually have tears, and they have
Mhm.
this thing called a nictitating membrane, which it's actually a true thing. It's like an additional eyelid, and it the crocodile uses it to kind of rinse its eyeball and get some water or some tears in there to moisten it if it's been out of the water too long. So a
Hmm.
nictitating membrane helps kind of moisten the eyeball of the crocodile. And apparently cats, I didn't know this either until I researched, but
Oh,
cats also have apparently some kind of nictitating membrane. So it's
I didn't know
basically
that.
it's an extra kind of eyelid which helps the crocodile rinse its own eyeballs with tears.
Oh, that's fun. And as a professor, you're such a great teacher. I would love to sit on in one of your classes in Guelph. We have a question from Jane Doucette. Hi, Jane. Thanks for joining us. Is Lawrence going to write a book about his work in prisons? She says, I'd read it.
Well, thank you. I have
Mhm.
been planning on writing a book about my work in prisons. You know, I've been going into book clubs from time to time in prisons for about 15 years, just
Mm.
occasionally, through a group called Book Clubs for Inmates, where the books are circulated for free, and then there are conversations about the books, and then sometimes an author like me goes and talks to the prisoners about the book. It's really
Mhm.
quite a lovely thing to do, and I also have taught a course in creative writing and memoir writing, autobiographical writing in a
Oh,
federal
that is so
penitentiary for
cool.
women in Kitchener, Ontario, not too far from Toronto. But I haven't been thinking about writing a book about it, but now that you mention it, maybe.
I think it's a great idea. And Linda asks, I wonder, is making up playful language a part of the oral African American tradition?
Well, I think making up playful language is part of a lot of traditions. Um,
Hmm.
Certainly, you hear a lot of really rich words in Yiddish culture and Yiddish language. Well, we have so many rich words from Yiddish, that have made their way into English, like kvetch, which I love that word to mean to complain,
Ajita.
to
Oh,
kvetch. It's
yeah,
a great word,
yeah.
and there are
Yeah.
so many other rich words in so many other languages that have made their way into English. Um, I mean, my family, my African American family that became African Canadian, is very word playful. A lot of silly words, a lot of made up words, a lot of turning words on their heads and inverting their meanings or deliberately changing the meaning of a word to add an extra edge or shove to it. And so language is something that's been a huge joy in my life. The silliness of language is something to luxuriate in. And so I really tried to get a joy of language, into this book. Is it specifically and solely an African American or an African Canadian thing? No, of course not. There are many cultures and groups of people around the world who also love to play with language. But certainly in my African American family, there's been a great deal of language play, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm a writer and why I wrote this book, because I wanted to go back to the joy of language that I learned as a child, and to help inculcate that same joy in other children and others, who would read this book.
Well, and I'm doing my part. I'm going to have you know to bring bumfuzzle back into our daily vernacular.
I love that word. Now, I have to confess, I wish I could tell you, Anne, that I invented that word because it's
Oh,
such a great word that
it
I'd
is a
like
great
to
word.
say I invented it, but I did not. I was reading a history of African American peoples who had survived slavery and were being interviewed. This is way back in the 1800s, interviewed about their experiences as enslaved peoples. And this
Mhm.
one person who was being interviewed, I was, of course, reading a transcript of the interview, as of course this interview took place in the 1800s, used the word bumfuzzled, and clearly he meant confused. Like I was utterly bumfuzzled, and I loved the word. It sounded just perfect. Bumfuzzled just seemed great, for what was happening, and it seemed to really sound like confused to me. And so
Mhm.
ever since then, I've used the word too. So I wish I could say I invented bumfuzzled, but I found it in a transcript of a spoken interview with a former enslaved man.
Well, it needs to come back, and you know what? We're going to hopefully get it back into the Oxford Dictionary, right?
Yes, and it bumfuzzles me that it's not in the Oxford Dictionary. It should be.
Right. Oh my goodness, I couldn't agree more. And amazingly, we're just about out of time. Can you share with us what you're working on now before we wrap up?
Sure, yes. I'm just turning back to a novel that I set aside to write Beatrice and Croc Harry. Now it's really time to get to work on it. It's a novel about for adults about the African American soldiers, thousands of them, who came up during World War II to build the Alaska Highway in Yukon in northern British Columbia during World War II. So thousands of Black American soldiers find themselves in the far north of Canada, fending off an anticipated Japanese invasion, of Yukon and of Alaska in World War II. That invasion never took place, of course, but they built a highway to fend off the anticipated invasion. And so this is a
Wow.
story of African Americans in the far north of Canada during World War II.
Oh, wow. And when can we hope to see that
Oh,
on the
well,
shelves?
my editor is asking too. I need about 2 years, 2 years
Okay.
to write that thing, and then maybe another year to bring out. So I think it's gonna be 2 or 3 years before it sees the light of day.
Okay. Well, we'll be looking forward to that. And Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully you'll come back another time and chat about. We'd love to hear more about memoir writing as well, if that's one of your topics, right?
I'd love to come back, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so delighted to hear that you enjoyed
Oh,
Beatrice and
I
Croc Harry, Anne, and I hope to have the pleasure of meeting you in person again one day soon.
Oh, that'll be awesome. And you know what? This is one book, I'm all about sharing books, but this is one that will stay in my collection forever.
Oh,
And hopefully, if we cross paths again, you'll be able to sign it for me. So
absolutely. Thank you.
thanks. Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much. And thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the author journey. It was such a wonderful conversation with Lawrence Hill and his latest book, Beatrice and Croc Harry. I hope you can join us again real soon. We are live every Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock on the author journey. So for now, we'll say goodbye and we'll see you next time.